Hey, everybody. Let's get the Facebook live stream started. And hello, attendees. If you want to say in chat where you're calling from or watching from, as always, it's good to know where y'all are. And just 1 second as we start the Facebook stream. All right, almost there. Okay. Hopefully that's working. Let's see. Cool. All right. Hi, everybody. Hello from Iowa. Good evening. Thanks for spending your Friday night with us. And I will give it just another minute or two for folks to show up. But that is the really nice thing about a recorded webinar. It's not that big a deal if you miss the live one, because you can just watch it later. But it is really nice to have people here live. It feels more interactive. Oh, good morning to Odisha. Thank you for being up early to learn with us. Wait, no, the time zones changed, so it's now, what, 8:30 a.m. in India? Still, it's kind of early for a Saturday. Thanks for being here. All right, I'm going to get my slides shared. And hopefully everybody can see that. Yeah, can we get a thumbs up if the slides are showing up correctly for you? No, I'm just going to assume so. I'm assuming that it's showing up okay for y'all. If they are not, let me know. Beautiful. Thanks, y'all. All right, so I guess we'll go ahead and get started on this, our final official webinar of the semester. And I just want to say before we start that it has been such a joy to be here learning with all of y'all over the last 2 or so months. And I want to give a really huge thanks to everyone who has led workshops this semester. So our wonderful workshop leaders on all of these different topics who took the time to come spend an hour or two in the webinar, we are so grateful to them. And this is our final week, and we're going to talk about this very important topic, language revitalization. Of course, this is too big a topic to cover in 1 hour in any really meaningful way, but the idea here is just to give us a little taste of some of the ways that people go about language revitalization and give y'all some ideas, perhaps, for what you might want to do in your own communities. So just to reintroduce myself, hi everybody, I'm Anna Belew. I am the program manager at the Endangered Languages Project, and I am also an adjunct assistant professor of linguistics at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And so this is our last official class, but it is not our last week. Next week is going to be really exciting. We will be having participant presentations for our closing session. So this is an opportunity for some of the folks who have been attending the webinar to be up here talking to you next week. We're going to learn about the work of 11 different folks from all over the world and what they are doing in language documentation and revitalization. And I'm sure you may also be wondering about certificates. I've gotten some emails about those. Certificates will be going out next week, so keep an eye on your emails. And as we noted at the beginning of the semester, certificates will be going out automatically to everybody who attended most of the Zoom sessions live. If you weren't able to join for multiple of the live sessions, but you watched the videos afterwards and you still would like a certificate, please email me. Thank you to everybody who's already reached out. And so now let's actually get into the topic of language revitalization with some important caveats, right? So as I think I mentioned when I first introduced myself, my heritage is totally Euro-American. As far as I know, all of my ancestors spoke English as far back as we know about. And so I don't have the really important, crucial insights of a person who has engaged in revitalization of their own language. So this is me mostly talking as an academic, as a support person, as an ally to language revitalization. But I'm going to send y'all to a lot of additional learning resources by people who have worked on their own languages. And so what exactly is language revitalization? Well, by the broadest definition, it's any kind of effort to strengthen a language, particularly a language that is experiencing language shift or which is at risk of language shift, right? Any language that is facing challenges to its vitality. Revitalization is, exactly what it sounds like, giving vitality back to a language, making it live more. And so in real terms, this can mean creating new speakers of a language, right? Helping kids learn, helping adults learn, and helping people use the language more often with more people, and creating new spaces for people to use the language. Again, they call these domains of use in technical linguistic terms. Some people don't really believe this concept is useful, some people do, but basically it's about making more space for a language in people's lives. And this can also include more high-level efforts like promoting language rights, gaining language awareness at the community level or the province level or the national level. All of this stuff is language revitalization. And I want to talk for a second about terms, right? That's kind of how we're using revitalization tonight. But you might also have seen terms like language revival, language reclamation, language maintenance, language awakening, sort of in this general space near language revitalization. So we'll just take a second to talk about a couple of those. So language maintenance is actually a lot what it sounds like. It's really about keeping things kind of stable. So this is not necessarily when you're aiming for a very sharp increase in speakers of a language, like you might be if you have very few speakers and you'd like to gain a lot more. Maintenance is often about preventing a decline in the language, whether that's in the number of speakers or how often it's used. And then language revival can be used in the same way as language revitalization, but revival and awakening of a language often mean creating new speakers of a language which had gone to sleep, which didn't have anybody who could speak it for a time. So revival is one of those terms that could mean a couple different things, but it may mean the same thing as awakening in some contexts. And reclamation is actually sort of a broader concept than language revitalization narrowly. So it's moving beyond like this very small focus on language to really more of a cultural and identity reclamation, which includes language. And this also includes foregrounding or focusing on Indigenous ways of knowing about language and understanding language, rather than this sort of linguistic Western academic laser focus on just fluency or number of speakers or that sort of thing. And if you would like to learn more about the framework of language reclamation, there is a link here to a great paper by Wesley Leonard on the concept of language reclamation. And so some of the most common goals in language revitalization are, again, increase the number of people who can use the language, increase the amount that they use the language, right? Maybe go from somebody using it just once a week to using it every day. That also includes making it possible to use your language in more parts of life, right? Maybe you wish you could go to the store and use your language to buy things, or do high-level business deals in your language, or use your iPhone in your language, all the way up to I wish I could go to court in my language or speak to government officials in my language, right? Expanding the areas your language can be used in. And this also includes visibility and awareness raising and general sort of cultural promotion of language. So maybe you're hoping that more people just start saying hello and thank you in their daily lives in your language. Sort of like in Hawaii today, almost everyone, even tourists, knows enough Hawaiian to greet people and say thank you in Hawaiian, which is huge. And that can be a really important goal of revitalization, is that sort of community visibility. It could also include things like, I want the street signs to be bilingual in my language. Somebody was telling me very charmingly the other day that in Wales, if there is a street sign that is only in English, people will write graffiti on it that says in Welsh, "Where's the Welsh?" Right? That's definitely a type of language revitalization to bring awareness that way. And then finally, probably most centrally to everything else, right? The why. Language revitalization at a very deep level is about reconnecting to language and culture and community and ancestors and land and all sorts of other things. And again, I'm not the person to speak about this since I don't have personal experience of language revitalization, but many, many people will indeed tell you that this is truly healing. This is the powerfully healing activity of language revitalization. Oh. And if we talk about well-being and healing and language revitalization, especially if, as we talk about later, you're applying for funding for these things, it's really important to be able to point to all of this research that talks about language revitalization and human well-being, or more than human well-being, the well-being of the whole dang world. But language revitalization has been shown to improve physical health in a lot of ways, right? It correlates to lower rates of diabetes, lower rates of smoking, or a greater likelihood to quit smoking tobacco. It leads to lower rates of drug and alcohol abuse. And I would not be surprised to find that language revitalization can contribute to other kinds of physical health as well. Because, obviously, in many cases, it ties to reclaiming traditional foodways, which can be better for your body. It can translate to more physical activity if you get involved with cultural activities, right? Lots of ways it can be better for your body. And language revitalization is also really clearly shown to improve mental health and emotional well-being. And so several studies have shown lowered suicide rates, especially among young people in communities that have kept their Indigenous language or are revitalizing their Indigenous language. There's general evidence for better mental health and emotional health among people who are reclaiming language, and a greater sense of identity and belonging and sort of social inclusion and social well-being as well. And sort of even outside of a single person, language revitalization can contribute to broader society, if you want to call it that, right? A lot of research from Australia is showing language reclamation tied to better economic opportunities and better chances of finishing secondary school. And actually, one of our interns here at ELP, Anando Ghosh, is currently developing a really fantastic, very comprehensive resource about language and well-being. And we'll be really excited to share that when it's finished. So as we talked about in week one, language diversity around the world is having the worst time in all of human history right now. Languages are being silenced faster than at any point that we ever know of in all of history, right? Things are bad. This is the worst time for language diversity. But it is also the best time in all of human history for language revitalization. That's a good thing. That's an amazing thing. So there was this wonderful survey by Gabriela Perez Baez and her colleagues in 2019. And it presented an overview of revitalization programs around the world from a survey of 245 programs. And that is just the programs who answered the survey. There are probably a lot more that are not represented there, But this survey showed that since the year 2000, about 2/3 of all of the language revitalization programs out there began. And since 2010, about 1/3 of those programs have started. And so really, if we look by decade, this is a really steep upward shift in language revitalization programs. So long story short, people are revitalizing languages more and faster now than ever before. So this is a really good time to be doing this work. Let's see, I think I see some hands raised. Feel free to just drop questions in. But while y'all are typing your questions, I will also note that I'd love to hear from you about what you are noticing around you with language revitalization. Are there people in your community who are starting to do some of these things or who have been doing them for a long time? And what do you hope for your community to start working on? And you don't have to answer now, you can think about it and we can talk about it at the end. And language revitalization can take place on a lot of different scopes, right? It can be of different sizes, but it's all important. So at the small scale, or the large scale rather, these are efforts that take place maybe at a national level, or maybe an entire community or an entire region, aiming to reverse language shift. So a very famous example is a language that either is called Israeli or Hebrew, depending on who you ask, but this is now the national language of Israel. And that is one of sort of the big stories of success in language revitalization, right? Going from a language that basically nobody spoke on a daily basis to a language that millions of people speak every day and is the official language of a whole country. That is an extreme story of success in large scale language revitalization. Unfortunately, most languages do not have an entire nation state behind them to prop them up. So if we look at smaller but still very big revitalization efforts, we see cases like Scottish and Irish Gaelic, which have sub-regions of a nation where they are being really strongly revitalized with a lot of government support and a lot of social support, although there's never a case where there's no controversy or conflict around language revitalization. Similarly, Olelo Hawaii, the Hawaiian language, was down to just a few hundred fluent speakers in the 1970s. And today there are, I don't have the exact number in front of me, but something like 20,000 very proficient speakers, including kids who have now grown up speaking Hawaiian from the time they were babies. This is an amazing success story. Similarly, with the Maori language revival movement since the 1970s and 80s, again, the New Zealand government is pouring a lot of support into Maori language. They are hoping to have 1 million speakers within the next decade, I believe. And so these kind of large scale national projects to revitalize language can be hugely successful. But this kind of very big revitalization program requires a lot of funding, a lot of resources, a lot of people of the type that you usually need support from a large government for, right? Not everybody has that, but currently the International Decade of Indigenous Languages promoted by the UN is a really good time to push governments to give this kind of support. If not during the UN's International Decade of Indigenous Languages, then when can we convince governments to support it? But I think much more commonly around the world, we see small scale revitalization efforts that are having really impressive, huge effects on language vitality. And so these can take place just in one person, right? You can have a one person language revitalization effort. You could do it within one family, right? Maybe just your spouse and your kids. It could be local, it could be in one village or maybe one neighborhood. Or similarly, it's any small group, right? Like a group of parents at a particular school or a religious center, or everybody who works together at one business decides Friday is going to be the day we only speak our language. Any kind of small group or individual effort can go a really long way. And it can make a big difference in language use in your community. And these kinds of smaller scale revitalization efforts are doable without a ton of resources or official support, right? You don't need a whole national government behind you to revitalize your language. You can do it yourself with minimal resources. And these are the kinds of efforts we're going to be focusing on today, because I assume nobody here is an entire national government by yourselves, and I don't assume that you have the resources of a whole government behind you. So we're going to talk about mostly things that communities or individuals or families or smaller groups can do. So method one that I'd like to share about is the language nest. And I'm sure a lot of y'all maybe have heard of language nests. We made a little explainer graphic a couple months ago. And essentially, a language nest is an immersion program. And that means it's a space where kids hear only the language being revitalized, or mostly that language, without using very much of the dominant language or the colonial language or the language that people are shifting to, right? So essentially, it's a daycare where babies and really little children go to be surrounded by language in their early life. And some people have called language nests grandmother's house, right? That's the experience that it's aiming to replicate. It's supposed to be like a place where you can just go and interact with elders and be talked to and have the language all around you when you're a little baby. And this is really effective because when kids are really small, they are so good at learning language, right? That's how humans learn language. When they're babies, they hear it all around them and they just naturally pick it up. And so language nests kind of imitate the way kids normally learn language in a context where everyone around them is speaking it. And a little bit of the history, they started back in the 1980s in Aotearoa, or New Zealand, with the Maori Kohangareo program. And that was in 1982. And by 1985, there were 300 language nests in Aotearoa. This is huge. It was like an explosion of the language nest model. Today, there are more than 460 different language nests for little kids. And there are over 9,000 kids attending the Language Nest program. And that is about 1/20th of all children in New Zealand that are in any kind of daycare or preschool, right? That's huge. That's really big. And all of this was done at the beginning largely by people in the Maori revitalization movement. It wasn't done with full support from this government right away. It was done by people sort of getting together to do this in their homes and in their schools and in their community centers. Just keeping an eye on the chat. Yeah. And so this quickly spread to Hawaii. There was, in the 1980s, one of the founders of the Maori language nests was talking to Dr. Larry Kimura at the University of Hawaii. And we actually there was a nice illustration of this story done by one of our interns. I'll put that link in the chat later. But essentially, this guy who had started the Maori language nest, Tamati Ridi, he said to Larry in Hawaii, look, this is really working, right? When you talk to little kids in a language for a while, they'll start talking back in your language. And so by 1984, the first language nest opened in Hawaii on the island of Kauai. And now there are 11 different Punana Leo language nests on all of the main 5 Hawaiian islands. And this was really brave to do because in 1984, when the first language nest opened in Hawaii, it was still technically illegal for Hawaiian to be the medium of education in Hawaii. Sounds crazy, right? It's illegal to use the indigenous language of that place in that place, but this is a very common story around the world for language to be outlawed. And so today, tons of kids have grown up in the Punana Leo and have started speaking Hawaiian from a very young age. And To start a language nest, you might be thinking, this is great. This is something that could be wonderful in our community. So what do we need? Well, first off, you need people who speak the language or who can sign the language. And so in a lot of cases, elders who know the language are perfect for this role, right? It's called grandmother's house. Why not have the grandmothers there? And if possible, it's great to have more than one elder there who speaks fluently so they can talk to each other and not just to the kids. Because, you know, when people talk to really young children or babies, they sometimes like use really simple language like, oh, are you hungry? You're hungry, right? But when they're talking to another adult, they use full sentences, they use complicated vocabulary, and it's actually pretty good for little kids to have access to adult language around them. So if you can, it's great to have more than one adult speaker there. And also, little kids and babies take a lot of energy. And so it's good to have some younger adults there to help, you know, with childcare activities. And then, of course, you'll also need kids to participate in the language nest. So ages 0, right, for really little babies, all the way up to age 5. And these should be kids whose families are really committed to supporting their language learning, right? Ideally, those parents will also start learning a little bit so that they can talk to the kids after school and they can really sort of build them up as they develop in their language skills. And then really, then you just need a place. Any building will pretty much do that is safe for kids. It can be a house, it can be a community center, it can be a church, it can be a store. Well, maybe not a store that's open, but any building where you can just hang out for half a day or most of the day and talk to kids and do normal daycare things. Whatever childcare looks like in your culture, do those things. Just do them in the language. And so language nests, this concept has spread all over the world because it's a really successful model and it's not too hard to implement. You don't need anything too special. You just need people who know the language, people who are committed to doing it, and a place to hold this. So there's some links here. I will share these slides to learn more about the history and practice of language nests. And language nests often lead into immersion education beyond sort of the kindergarten level. And so what exactly is immersion education? Again, immersion is just making sure that the students are surrounded by mostly or entirely the language that's being revitalized. And immersion education can be for primary school. You can continue it through secondary school and university, right? In Hawaii today, a kid can grow up starting school in a punana leo in Hawaiian, and then they can go to immersion school for every level and complete their PhD in Hawaiian. And for a language that, again, was really facing a lot of challenges just 50 or 60 years ago, this is a big deal. And this is a huge deal when 40 years ago, it was illegal to have schools in Hawaiian. And so really little things grow into big things. A language nest in Hawaii became an entire education system in the Hawaiian language. So dream big. You can start small and dream really big. You can have a PhD in your language someday if you work at it, hopefully. And so one example is the Kekula Kaiapuni o Anuenue in Palolo Valley in Honolulu. This is basically entirely in Hawaiian until later grades. And so kids do learn English. One of the concerns you may hear from parents is like, oh, I want my kid to learn the dominant language. I promise they will. It's everywhere, right? They can't turn on the television or go to the store or talk to friends at other schools without using that language. They will learn it. But at school, it's all Hawaiian. And it's not an entirely mainstream Western academic program either. There's a lot of focus on traditional cultural practice. So it kind of weaves together Hawaiian culture and knowledge and language and land right here. As you can see, Palolo Valley is one of the prettiest places on the island of Oahu. And so once we move beyond just thinking about how to teach language to kids, we also start thinking, okay, we're going to need teachers for these schools, right? We're going to need adults who speak the language. What's a good method for teaching language to adults in a revitalization context? And I will say, I am not a language teaching specialist, that I only know revitalization contexts, but this is a much more appropriate way to teach language in a lot of cases than the sort of textbook classroom language learning app model that you might learn, say, Mandarin or Korean or, I don't know, Russian with. And so a mentor apprentice program involves usually a pair of two people. Sometimes it could be more. There is a fluent speaker, or at least a really good speaker, who is the elder, the mentor. And often this is an elder. And then there is an adult learner who is called the apprentice. And in English, this is basically like a fancy word for a specialized kind of learner who is learning from one individual person to get really good at a skill. And so it's just what it sounds like. The mentor and the apprentice spend a lot of time together, but it's not quite like a language class where you go through vocabulary and do verb exercises. Really, the focus is on doing everyday activities together using the language, right? And this is, again, an immersion program. You try and keep English or any other dominant language out of that space and just stay in the language. And if you're thinking, boy, that sounds really hard if I don't know the language at all. Well, yeah, it's difficult at first. And there are a lot of really great resources to help people get through those early phases where you're just kind of pointing at stuff and saying, what is this? And so this is not only a great way to learn language, to gain skills in language, but it's also a really wonderful way to strengthen relationships with elders. If you are looking for an excuse to hang out with your elders, but you're not really sure what to do together or what to talk about, this can help bridge that gap. And so it can do a lot as far as strengthening relationships. And there's a reason a lot of mentor-apprentice pairs are family members, right? A grandparent and grandchild, or an uncle and a niece or nephew, or whatever. It's a good way to get closer to that person, including your family. And mentor-apprentice programs don't necessarily require a lot of equipment or money or a special physical space. You can just hang out at each other's houses or drive around or take a walk or whatever. And so the history of this essentially was developed in the mid-1990s in California for use in California indigenous language communities. It was first used here on the West Coast of the United States. I'm sorry, it says Canada there. I meant California, but there are now many mentor-apprentice programs in Canada, as well as all over the world. And I've actually had colleagues from Africa and India and other parts of the world that don't really have mentor-apprentice programs very much yet, reaching out to ELP recently, asking for materials about how to start mentor-apprentice programs. So I hope to see lots more of them going forward. One great example is the Prairies to Woodlands Indigenous Language Revitalization Circle. And so the Métis people are a group in Canada that have several traditional languages shared among Métis people. This includes Michif, Cree, Ojibwe, and Dakota. And so they pair speakers of these languages with apprentices, with learners. And again, they're often family members. And what's really impressive is that during the COVID pandemic, they successfully adapted this model to Zoom because obviously it is very difficult to get together with elders when there's a deadly pandemic going on, right? It's not safe for them. And almost everybody in a mentor-apprentice program, the mentor is almost always an older person, right? So it was very important to move this online. And so Prairies to Woodlands not only developed training and support to help people move to Zoom, but they've also done a lot of work incorporating language documentation into these mentor-apprentice programs, right? So the mentor and the apprentice will hang out, they'll talk, they'll learn language, and they'll record all of it happening so that other people then can also learn from those interactions, which is a really beautiful model. Another method that is really popular and quite doable for a small group is land-based learning activities and language camps. And again, you'll notice that a lot of these revitalization methods involve just doing stuff together while using the language, rather than necessarily sitting in a classroom doing homework. And so there are many benefits to this. Obviously, being out on the land has a lot of physical and mental health benefits, especially for people who may spend a lot of time indoors, sitting at a desk, looking at a computer. But also, there's a lot of research on how physical movement and shared activities and really just joy in being together doing things can support language learning and language revitalization. And so land-based activities could include, we're all going to go hunting. We are all going to learn how to weave a basket. We're all going to learn how to tan skins. We're going to do a fishing trip in the language. And this can also include camps, right? And I don't know if this term is commonly used in other parts of the world. In North America, when we say a summer camp, we're talking about a place that like kids go during school holidays for a few weeks to do fun things. Sometimes they're focused around an activity like I'm going to fishing camp over the summer. But these camps are different in that they are mostly or entirely in the language being revitalized. The focus is really on helping the kids or even the adults connect with language and culture. And same thing with language events and language gatherings, right? Maybe you're going to have a big festival where everybody has a poetry competition and there's a lot of music in the language. Any kind of small event or gathering around language learning can also be done with a relatively small amount of money and resources and support. Really, again, what most of these things need are people who are committed to doing it. I think that's the lesson that I take away from almost all language revitalization methods and stories is you just need people who really care and are committed to doing it. So this summer, actually, just a few months ago, the Esa community in Cameroon held their very first annual Esa Summer Camp. And so this was kind of a first step towards a bigger scale language revitalization program with kids. And so in Esa country, there are maybe 1,500 people who speak the language well today. And a lot of kids are growing up speaking mostly or only French. So during the summer holidays, when school is out, a lot of kids leave the city and come back to maybe their parents' or grandparents' villages for the holidays. And so the goal of this camp was to have targeted activities and things to do and lessons and just a lot of fun ocean knowledge and activities that were done in Esa, in the language being revitalized. So here you can see, I think kids are collecting shellfish in this picture. On the coast of the Esa country, there's lots of delicious little shellfish in the sand that you can gather and eat. I think that's what's going on here. But again, the camp leaders would explain the activities and talk to the kids totally in Esa. And this is another example of a community really just doing something themselves without waiting for a lot of external support. There is a small publisher called Ndoi International Press that publishes books about Esa and related peoples in that area. And so basically the community came up with all the money with some support from this publishing house, and volunteers staffed it, and volunteers cooked for the meals for the kids. And it was a really beautiful example of everybody in a community coming together to make something happen without a lot of external resources. So all of these things are about having fun together, reconnecting with language and culture, learning about land again, reconnecting with it. And again, it's doable without a lot of resources. So here are two really helpful handbooks discussing language camps. These are focused on the Canadian context, but you should be able to get some useful ideas for wherever you are. And as far as other methods, methods number 5 through infinity are whatever you come up with, right? Language revitalization is still a growing field. A lot of these methods have been invented in just the last 10 or 20 or 30 years. They're pretty new. People are still coming up with incredibly effective ideas for language revitalization. And so a few of the other things that I've seen happening around the world, there are family language programs, right, where you really just focus on bringing the language back into your own family home. You could have song and poetry competitions for big public events. You can make video games in your language. You can dub over movies or cartoons in your language. You can, make signs for streets around you as long as that's legal. Or maybe put up a sign in your business that explains how to order coffee in your language, right? I've seen a lot of like Starbucks in Aotearoa with guides to ordering coffee in Maori. Publicity campaigns, whatever you can think of could be a really good approach to revitalizing your language. So the key thing is just to find what really works for your context, your community, and your language, and what draws on the skills and interests of the people who are most committed to language revitalization. All right, I'm going to take 1 second to look at the chat here. Let's see, anything urgent? Yes, I will share today's and previous presentations in an email at the end of the webinar. And I will come back to any other questions at the end. But oh yes, and you can rewatch this video later. I will share the YouTube and Facebook links to watch the video later. Whew. Okay, moving along. Here are some ideas for just really small ways that you could start language revitalization without much help. So first off, you could choose to create domains in your life where you only use your language. So a lot of folks choose the kitchen as this place. So in your house, we are only going to speak our language in the kitchen, right? So let's say you are revitalizing Hawaiian, no English in the kitchen, only Hawaiian. You could also find a mentor, right? If you don't know your language very well, think about the elders maybe around you or other people who do speak the language really well, and see if you could start a small mentor apprentice program. Spend time with that person for a few hours every week talking in language. If you already know the language really well, perhaps you could be a mentor. Maybe you could work with a young person who wants to learn the language. You could also start a group of people, maybe a small group of people who get together to weave or to bead or to make food or any other important activity that y'all all enjoy and only speak your language there. You could do a project, right? Make a short video, make some social media content like Tiara talked about last time. Anything that gets other people in your community really interested in revitalization and joining this movement. Again, yep, make social media content. It's a great way to raise awareness. You could create signs for your business, right? Here's how to order ice cream in my language. What else? There are so many opportunities, so many cool ways that you could approach this as just one person or a small group. I would love to hear your techniques, what you're working on, any ideas, no matter how outlandish they seem, they could be awesome. And if you're looking at all this and you're thinking, oh my gosh, this is really complicated, there are so many options, where should we start? That's okay, that's totally normal. It's a really challenging set of decisions to make. The First Peoples Cultural Council have just released this wonderful toolkit for community language planning. And this is sort of a resource to help you think through your options and work with other people in your community to make a plan for what you want to do to revitalize your language. But if you're still feeling a little nervous, a little intimidated, a little overwhelmed, good news. ELP is launching a language revitalization mentoring program in February is the official start date. So we have just hired these 4 really wonderful people who all have personal experience of revitalizing their own languages, as well as lots of other aspects of language and culture revitalization. Everything from starting a school, creating technologies, doing community radio, doing academic research about language revitalization. So these 4 wonderful people are here to help in February. If you have any questions, reach out to them, and I'll share more about that soon. And next summer, more good news. We will be launching the Language Revitalization Help Desk. So this is going to be a free online resource for people who are working in language revitalization or who want to start. This will also come along with our brand new website, which we're very excited about. And so this will include free learning resources, much like these webinars, stories of what people are doing around the world. There will be spaces to talk to other people, again, kind of like these webinars, and a global directory and map of language revitalization programs, right? So if you are wondering if maybe there's someone else in your province or near you doing language revitalization, you'll be able to reach out and get in touch with them more easily. So before we go on to funding, I'll check the chat again. Oh, Ronnie contributed some of the design elements for the FPCC toolkit. Bravo, Ronnie, that toolkit is so gorgeous. I salute you for that work. I sent that toolkit to our website designers saying like, I hope you can make us a website as beautiful as this. So Ronnie, amazing work. All right, so let's talk about funding, because I kept saying over and over, there's a lot you can do without very much money. And that is very true. But language revitalization also can require money, right? People's time is valuable. They need to buy food and pay the bills. And they can't necessarily devote all of their time as a volunteer to language revitalization. Similarly, if you want to have a school, you need a building, and those are expensive. So let's talk a little bit about some of the places you can look for money to do this. First off, I want to say, generally speaking, this is a terrible truth. There is more money out there for language documentation than for language revitalization. Why do you think this is? Feel free to share some ideas in the chat and maybe think back to what we talked about in week 1 about the origins of language documentation, right? This, what they called salvage anthropology, this obsession with recording the things that were disappearing, or that, you know, the governments sponsoring this work had actively suppressed. There are a lot of interesting and difficult reasons why there may be a lot more money for language documentation than for revitalization. But the good news is, if you're looking for funding for documentation, there is some available sometimes. So the Endangered Languages Documentation Program, or the ELDP, who are often confused for ELP, we are not the same organization. But they fund applicants anywhere in the world, right? So no matter what country you are in, you are eligible for funding. However, it is much harder to get these grants if you are not some type of academic researcher, right? So you could be a PhD student, you could have a PhD already, but it's pretty hard to get this funding if you don't have an academic on your team, which is unfortunate. They also prioritize languages which are more endangered, right? So essentially, the smaller the number of speakers, the better your chances of getting this grant. They offer what they call small grants. This is not small at all to most of us. They offer up to £10,000, that's UK pounds, for small projects. Again, that's quite a lot of money, especially in most parts of the world. They also offer individual graduate scholarships for PhD students whose PhDs involve doing language documentation. They offer postdoctoral fellowships. So if you are about to complete your PhD or you just have, it's a good option. And then major documentation projects. The grants go up to £150,000. It's quite a lot of money. And this is for documentation projects over many years with multiple researchers. So if you have a big team and a big plan for documentation, this might be a good funding source. There is also the Firebird Foundation. These are slightly smaller grants, but again, still quite a lot of money, up to 10,000 US dollars for research documenting oral literature in Indigenous languages. Again, unfortunately, this is restricted to kind of academic type people. So it is for anthropologists and linguists, but that includes graduate students. So this is, again, one of those that's hard to access if you're not some kind of academic. And yeah, I'll be honest, it can be difficult to find large grants for language revitalization work. The things are getting better in some countries, like the US has funded a little bit of language revitalization work in the last few years. Canada, especially British Columbia, is actually doing a pretty dang amazing job of funding language revitalization. Similarly, Aotearoa and Australia are beginning to put more resources towards language revitalization. Aotearoa in particular is committing a lot of great government support and resources for Maori revitalization. And depending on where else you are, if you are in the UK or an EU country, there may be some money available for you. But I'm afraid in a lot of countries, it's very difficult to get government funding, as far as I know. It's worth checking, though. There might be a local program, something at the city level or the provincial level. You should look into it. Talk to your elected officials and perhaps even encourage them to honor the International Decade of Indigenous Languages by committing to funding this work. Large scale or even medium or small scale language revitalization really benefits from having enough money to pay people to do work and pay the rent on the buildings where that work happens, right? It really helps. And so here are a few programs that do have grants available for language revitalization. So first off, the Endangered Language Fund. And full disclosure, in 2018, I got a grant from their Language Legacies project for an EASA youth revitalization program. They're very easy and pleasant to work with. I strongly encourage all of you to apply. They're great. So their Language Legacy program offers grants of about $2,000 for language documentation and revitalization projects anywhere in the world. And very importantly, you don't have to be an academic to apply for these. That's great, right? So if you are a teacher or a community leader or just a person who really cares about language and has a good plan, you can apply. Then the Native Voices Endowment is more limited in who can apply for it. It is only a list of specific Native American tribes who came into contact with the Lewis and Clark expedition. But if you are affiliated with one of those tribes, that's a great funding option. And then the Sharing Language Diversity Fellowship is sort of a research scholarship for PhD students who are doing language documentation. So again, easier to get money for documentation, but this is a really great funding source for revitalization as well. Similarly, the Foundation for Endangered Languages is a UK-based foundation that gives small grants up to $1,000 US that support, enable, or assist the use of one or more endangered languages. And so this is pretty broad in scope. Any of the activities we talked about today could be included in a grant like that. And this grant program is currently open to applications. If you have been looking for just the perfect place to request funding, this could be it. So get your applications in by December 31st. And then again, a pretty specific type of program, if you are doing community radio or other community media, Cultural Survival has an Indigenous Community Media Fund. So they give grants of about $5,000 US to support community radio or other types of things like perhaps community newspapers. And they also give training and support on technical skills and managerial and editorial skills for community media. It's a great program. And finally, this is an increasingly popular option for revitalization programs. Crowdfunding, right? If there are people around you who can contribute resources, why not make it easy to do so with a GoFundMe or Kickstarter campaign? This does rely on getting individuals to share their money, but it can be really good for small fundraising projects that have strong community support, right? If everyone in your area is really in favor of language revitalization, this could be a good way to collect, I don't know, a small amount of money from each person, enough together to really start a program. This is also a great option if you have friends or colleagues in other countries and those other countries have a stronger currency than your country. So let's say you are living in Cameroon and you have a friend in America, and that friend could get all of her friends to send the price of a dinner, but where you are, the price of a dinner could fund like half of a language program, right? That's probably an exaggeration, but my own experience is when I ask my family and friends in America to give money for EASA revitalization projects, the amount of money that is not that much in America, but is a lot elsewhere, can really support a huge amount of language revitalization work. So lean on your friends in countries with stronger currencies to send contributions to your revitalization program. So that's the general scope of the funding landscape in language revitalization. If there are any other sources you know about that I missed, please let us know. It would be wonderful to have sort of a broader document. And we also welcome your thoughts and ideas and questions about language revitalization in general. So I will just hang out and look through the chat for some questions. All righty. So yes, everybody requesting the links that are in the slides. I will share the slides and you can click all those things. Toponymic imperialism, that is a great phrase, Ronnie. Yeah, so toponymic basically means relating to place names, and imperialism around place names. Yeah, erasing indigenous names for places and replacing them with English or French or Spanish, right? That's a really good way of putting it, toponymic imperialism. Paula noted language revitalization of community biodiversity. Yeah, absolutely. Language diversity and indigenous languages are so closely related to biodiversity and to all of the ways that living things relate to each other. Language revitalization can have a big impact on biodiversity in an area. And let's see, Akanksha notes, ever since I began my research in my community's language, I've formed closer bonds with my community members. Oh, that's beautiful to hear. Yeah, I think that's a pretty common experience. Working together on language is a really meaningful bonding experience. Jacques says, I'm in Goma, Democratic Republic of the Congo, and here our revitalization is on a small scale. We launched a Kihunde training center. Yes, that's a great example, right? This is a local initiative. And Jacques, I hope maybe you can tell people a little bit more about it in the chat. But from what I know, the Kihunde Training Center trains teachers to teach in Kihunde language. They work on dictionary production and other materials for language learning, and probably many other wonderful things that I don't know about. So Jacques, please tell us about it in the chat. Tesfaye says, andragogy is the best approach for adults, as adults do not learn in a way children learn. Yeah, adult learners do need different approaches to really learn language effectively. I don't know this word andragogy, so if you'd like, please tell us a little bit more about it in the chat. And let's see, Robert notes revitalization might be hard to measure. Yeah, that is a really important point. Thank you for bringing that up, right? This is something to bear in mind, that your goals for revitalization don't have to be everyone in the whole community is fluent in 10 years, right? That's a very ambitious goal. That's a great goal, but that's not the only thing that counts as success, right? Like I said, in Hawaii, most people can say aloha and mahalo. That's amazing. That is huge symbolic value of respect to the owners of Hawaii, right? To the legitimate occupants of that place. Uh, and anything else that feels like a success to your community can be a great goal, whether it's, we want everyone to be able to say a basic greeting in the next 5 years. We want everyone to be able to understand most of it when elders talk, or we want to see the language on signs. We want to have it as an elective in schools. All those things are great outcomes. All those things can be success if that's what your community decides on. So again, don't hold yourself to impossible standards. You can choose what success looks like. Tara says, we don't have a ton of speakers, less than 100, but because of COVID, they started doing Zoom classes, and we have a cohort of 18 in the second year of a language program. Yay! Awesome. I think online classes are so important for those of us who don't live in their community but still want to learn. Yes, that is so, so true. It used to be really hard to learn language if you lived away from other speakers, but now you can hop on Zoom and talk to them every week. This is a huge advantage of technology. Ronnie says, I work at the Massey Theatre in New Westminster, BC. During COVID, we used funding for capacity to build some performance, audio, and visual studios with the idea to host recording initiatives with equipment included. Cool. So this course has been helpful in looking at ways to activate these resources in an urban space. Yes, that's really exciting, Ronnie. Congratulations on that recording space. There are so many things you could do with it. I'm sure you have a lot of really good options in mind. But yeah, getting elders in there to record, having students make little movies, like record an album in language, so many cool possibilities. And Judith says, Ayak is a dormant language and we are trying to revitalize it. Ah, yes, I am sending all of my good wishes. That's a really important project, and I hope we're going to hear from you more about it next week. Also, I really apologize. I see the name of this language written all the time, but I never hear it pronounced. So I don't know if it's Ayak or Iyak. Please correct me. Let's see. I think that's it for the questions and comments for now. So if there's anything else y'all wanted to discuss, drop it in the chat. I am very curious to learn what andragogy is. And Ronnie, thank you for sharing that link to the language toolkit. It's a great resource. Yeah, but I think really the takeaway that I hope you all leave with tonight is there are a lot of possible paths for language revitalization. There are a lot of different ways to use your own knowledge and skills and passions and interests in service of language revitalization. And yeah, it can be really challenging, it can be difficult, it can be demanding, but what you hear from people who do this work over and over is just how nourishing it is and how healing it can be. And like y'all are saying in the chat, you can build closer bonds with people in your community. You can learn new things about yourself and your culture and your identity. You can have better physical and mental health in your life. So if you're thinking about getting started in language revitalization, do it. We're all cheering for you, and we hope that you'll share what you're doing, maybe in the Facebook group in the future. There we go. So let's see. Paula asks, I'm wondering if anyone knows of interactive digital platforms in service of language revitalization projects. Great question. I guess it depends on what kind of interactive digital platform you're thinking of. So like, is there a social media app just in your language? I don't know of any like social media networks specifically for language revitalization, but there are tons of Facebook groups and Twitter lists and Instagram and TikTok communities for specific languages. There are also some really great online learning platforms focused on language revitalization, like we had the director of 7,000 Languages here a couple weeks ago. So if you check out 7,000 Languages, they offer free language learning software for language revitalization. Do we have a curated list of different options? Not on hand, but if you'll send me an email with a little more specificity about what you're looking for, I bet we can find you a list of options or come up with one. Let's see, yeah, and if anyone else has favorite interactive digital platforms for language revitalization, let us know. And that is actually really the goal of ELP's Language Revitalization Help Desk that's coming out next summer. We want to be a digital space where people can interact around topics and ideas and stories in language revitalization. So come by next summer. All right, folks. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I will just remind y'all that next week is going to be a wonderful closing session where we can all listen and learn to some great language work happening around the world. And yeah, if you want to exchange contact info to stay in touch with other people in this webinar, you are welcome to. We'll have a little like reception mixer, let's hold up our certificates virtually kind of session. And yeah, I guess we will see you all at this time next week, same place. Can't wait to see y'all there. I hope everyone has a beautiful weekend. Thanks, everybody. Take care.